Hi, and welcome to the Diablo podcast, your home for Diablo diehards, tryhards, casual, and hardcore alike. I am your host, Xanth, and we're doing things completely different today. In fact, we're shifting gears entirely, and that is a pun, Jonathan. I am joined today by Jonathan Rogers, the game director for Path of Exile 2, and he's joining us all the way from New Zealand. Jonathan, thanks for coming by.
No problem. Great to be here.
Um, so this is a Diablo podcast, but it's also an
hmm
ARPG podcast, and we spent a lot of time talking about Path of Exile by comparison, because I love playing both of them, which is there are dozens of us. There are dozens of us out there that enjoy both games. I've heard it's possible. Um, so Jonathan, as we start by talking about Diablo, I'm curious, like, what's your history with ARPGs? What brought you into this field, and what's your history with Diablo?
Well, I mean, obviously, I was a Diablo player. Diablo 1 first, and then Diablo 2. And funnily enough, the first time I played Diablo 2, I actually didn't like it compared to Diablo 1. It was kind of it was kind of funny, and I think the reason I reacted that way is because the fact that the monsters came back after it was weird to me. I was kind of completely not in the right mindset for this being a kind of online game. So it wasn't until I played it online with some friends. Like when I first, as I said, when I first played it, I actually kind of wasn't into it, and then I was talked into playing it again with some friends, and playing it online, it all kind of made sense, and everything kind of clicked, and it was great from that point onwards. But honestly, I would not say that I'm as hardcore of a kind of loot junkie, as you might say, as some of my friends, like Chris and Eric, both were like, true grinders, as it were. And they put a stupid number of hours in, whereas I was kind of more about like, come and play a build until I found it no longer fun anymore, and then I would stop and play something else, usually next season. So, like that. Or I guess we'd call them ladder resets back then. So the yeah, so effectively, I would say that I was not nearly as hardcore as far as they were. Like they were much more just like they absolutely needed to get, like they were just addicted to loot. So yeah, bit of a different thing, but then you know, I mean, obviously, like many other RPGs, like a huge fan of Dungeon Siege, one in particular, and various other things. I mean, there's not like too many entries in the genre, I suppose, as in the early days, but like yeah, I've always loved that type of thing, and yeah, I guess that's an answer.
No, it absolutely is, and I guess like you bringing it up, I kind of had forgotten about the fact that the monsters didn't reappear in Diablo initially,
Right.
um, and
I
how
mean,
much of a
Diablo
jump
One.
that.
Yeah, I mean, Diablo 1, while it did have multiplayer, was more like, I guess it was more focused on the sort of traditional single player RPG sort of stereotype, I guess, which is kind of, obviously monsters don't come back because why would they, right? Like you've killed them already. Like it doesn't make any sense in that context. So yeah, that was kind of one of those yeah, just a sort of a kind of a weird thing, I guess.
And while you were playing, old school Diablo 2, was there anything that you gravitated most towards a class in particular?
I mean, I kind of tried everything. I don't know that there was any one thing really. I would probably, I mean, I don't know. I probably the class I played the most would have been the like just ranged classes generally, I would say. But like yeah, I don't know if there was any one in particular that I would really that I would really say that was like the one thing. I mean, I'd honestly just kind of uh, since I like experimentation and kind of trying out new stuff, like that for me is more the thing, right? Like trying out new skills and different combinations and things like that. I mean, Diablo 2 didn't have nearly like, I mean, I liked that element of Diablo 2, but like that was the thing that I was most attracted to, and that I think has really formed a bit of my focus around Path of Exile as far as like what I have always advocated for. Like a lot of the sort of build diversity type stuff that we've got going on really comes from the fact that I love that kind of thing, like trying out new stuff and like weird combinations of things is kind of my thing. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm coming from that stuff.
So there are weird combinations plenty in Path of Exile, which
Yeah,
I don't think I've had I haven't had a actual playthrough that was the exact same. It
right,
just
right.
doesn't. It's like a snowflake. It doesn't really seem possible. Uh, so. you've played Diablo, you've had your ARPG history. So what is your history with GGG? Like how did you get going and how did this kind of turn out into what it is today?
Well, I mean, so yeah, I was one of the founders. I always knew I wanted to be a game developer, right from when I was, like kind of 10 years old. So it was really just a question of how that was going to happen. And I was friends with Chris from, well, when did I meet him? Probably might have been 13, 14, something like that. Pretty young. And basically, he was a couple of years older than me. He kind of taught me a couple of things in terms of programming right when I was in high school. And then we kind of like vaguely kept in contact while I was in high school. And then when I got to university, he was just kind of starting to finish up. And basically, we kind of said, hey, like when you finish university, he was saying he'd really like to do some kind of game project. And I was like, yep, I'm definitely in for that. So as soon as I finish university, we should do something. And Chris was the one who really made the case for making an action RPG like Diablo. Um, he was very much still into Diablo 2 a lot at that point. And he was kind of like, look, Blizzard don't seem to be making a sequel. A huge number. And, the funny thing about Diablo is that it stayed on store shelves longer than any other game in history. Like that game just had legs, you know what I mean? Like, and it's like clearly there was a hunger there for that type of game, and it kind of wasn't really being served. So we were just like, if no one else is going to make a sequel to Diablo 2, then we'll do it. Yeah, that was kind of the feeling there. And yeah, that's really how we got started. And I mean, we were naive. I was straight out of university. I've never had like an actual real job, you might say, except for this one. Yeah, uh, I just kind of dived right in and started writing code really. And Chris was also a programmer, so he was writing code as well. And then we just had to get another someone to do some art for us. And so Chris had a friend who he'd met playing Diablo. And he was like, hey, like he knew he was an artist, but he was in Sweden, and so it was just an online friend. And he said, hey, where do you think we could find someone to be an artist for us? And he was like, yeah, I'll come over and I'll do that. Like he was really keen. So that was how Eric got started. And so then it was just the three of us for a fair amount of time. And yeah, it really was just early days in a garage, just doing writing code, and yeah, it took a while to kind of get off the ground as far as getting the project really working well. But yeah, that's kind of the early days, I guess.
Now, I mean, like I can see behind you, you have a massive, beautiful office. You have an amazing entry with Path of Exile, which has already continued to evolve, right? And now you're going to put out a sequel, right?
That would be the
Uh,
idea.
which is huge, and you've stepped into the role of game director.
hmm
How does that feel to like have that? I don't want to say pressure, right? Because I think that's I guess position, right? How does it feel to kind of be taking the lead?
Well, I mean, I guess the first thing I would say is that I was always like in very integral. Like, I mean, so Chris, was obviously in the managing director position. I was the technical director technically because I was more on the programming side. Um, and I guess over time I kind of was able to do less and less actual programming. Um, but I mean, I was always involved in all of the game design decisions and kind of like how that would work. So that was kind of always part of what I did. So on some level, it's not so much that I have a new responsibility now; it's that I lost some of the old responsibilities I had because it became unable to be able to do them in addition to what else I was doing. Like I mean, I'm still a programmer at heart. Like I like doing that stuff, and I still have a few things that I do on my spare time. But generally speaking, I just kind of can't really be a programmer on this project anymore since there's too much else going on.
You gotta show up and talk
Um,
to schlubs like me, and like all
sure.
those kind of things.
Yeah,
And I
yeah.
get it, you don't get to
Um,
do all the fun
but
stuff.
then, as far as like being fully in charge of PoE 2, I mean, it just came down to the fact that like we reached a point where it became obvious that it was kind of it was the time when we decided we needed to split PoE 2 and PoE 1 apart from each other, because the plan was always to have those two projects be the same initially. And then at the point where we decided to split them, we're like, okay, well, at some point here, it's like I don't want to have to be worrying about Path of Exile 1 anymore for what I'm doing. I need to be concentrating fully on this project to make sure that it's going to be that's going to work out well. So it just kind of made sense for me to kind of assume that role. But Mark is very much there as well. We have he has the title of game director on this project as well, and that's because like really he is involved in everything as well. We're both kind of mirrors of each other on some level. We do have different focuses, but we have to both. It is a two-person job, because knowing the amount of things that need to be approved, looked at, decided on all the time just is impossible for one person to do it all. And on some level, you do need to have, at least in my belief in game development, you need to have some level of centralization, because otherwise you won't have a complete vision at the end. If it can't work with one person, then I guess it needs multiple. But the only way that that can happen is by both of us having a very good understanding of how the other person's thought process is, and knowing what they would decide for a given situation, and of course talking all the time as well. But like that kind of needs to happen. So the project's just too big for one, I think, unfortunately. But yes, but as I said, we still have that very much a model of I would not say we're designed by committee here. We're much more like, I mean, that isn't to say that we're not getting our staff members to come up with ideas or anything. But at the end of the day, I think that having one, or in this case two people's final say of like, this is good, this isn't good, like is better than kind of trying to please everyone, if you know what I mean. That I think is important.
In with the two of you,
Hmm.
what would you say the big difference is in creating Path of Exile 2 by comparison to one? Because like one, it in watching the development, it was kind of like you had the mechanisms, and you're still putting tracks in front of the cart, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Because we saw it start with just one act, then three, then and
Hmm.
I do have to say, one of the greatest surprises I've seen in video games was when you guys made the jump in the Fall of Oriath,
Yeah, yeah,
for from when I thought I was going to get one additional
yeah,
act to suddenly getting 10. Um,
yeah.
so you've had all this foundation that's already been laid for you, and lessons learned along the way through PoE 1. How has that changed development on PoE 2?
Well, I guess what I would say is that from my perspective, with PoE 1, I was trying to make the best action RPG I could, and with PoE 2, it's still exactly the same. And really, the only difference is the freedom to be able to change more things with PoE 2. Um, like to some, like you definitely build up a game builds up to the point where it's very hard to change certain things. And I would say that we maybe became too fearful at some points in PoE 1's development about changing certain things. Like, I mean, there is a reason for that fear, because it can come along with, like with backlash and that kind of stuff, right? So we need to be afraid of that. But with PoE 2, it's easier to be able to sort of look again and be like, hey, everything is potentially on the table. Like that we are allowed to discuss any potential thing that might need to be different. So therefore, that just releases the handcuffs. You can kind of start thinking about all sorts of stuff. And I mean, really, PoE 2, we've kind of re-looked at every mechanic. Now, it's funny how often we change stuff and then end up coming back to what we had, which can also happen. But I still think that the exercise is important to sort of reconfirm an understanding of why things were like that in the first place. And another kind of interesting thing that I've actually noticed with regard to the other designers is that because all of them, existed in a world that PoE 1 existed in, they are actually less confident in making changes than I am. Because, like, when I look at something like, oh, how does Energy Shield work? Like, to me, it's just like some random thing I decided in the past. Whereas to them, it's like, well, this is Path of Exile. This is how it works. You know what I mean? Like, I've got a completely different perspective on that. Like, yeah, there's, I guess, I would say I'm more willing to change some of those decisions because, as I said, to me, they're just some decision I made. Like I can, if I made it one way this before, I can make it a different way this time. You know, it doesn't have any real. Uh, I guess it doesn't have the same kind of reverence towards some of those decisions that people who kind of have seen many years of them existing do.
So what I'm
Um,
hearing is that anybody who likes Energy Shield should be scared, prepped for that.
we're not we're not changing it
Because
like
that's that.
we're,
I mean,
we're not it's not like it's
no,
some giant thing that'll matter, but like you know what I mean. It's like they're just little fundamental things like that that you know it's like to me I'm like yeah I'm open to changing this. It's fine.
no,
Um,
I definitely get that though, because
mm,
I think that is an interesting point, is that you were there before it existed. You know that the game can work with or without it,
right.
and why not change it as opposed to somebody
Hmm.
coming in and like, this is how it has always been. This is what I
Right.
know. And sometimes that's where people struggle with a seasonal mechanic in general of like, hey, the game has changed to what I used to like. In fact,
Right.
as I was going through some of the Twitter questions, one of the questions was like, why don't they revert it to my favorite season? Because that's when Path of Exile was the best.
Right.
Um, that there could never be a best Path of Exile because it's always changing, right? It's whatever's current. So they're not, to answer that question, I'm going to answer for you, Jonathan. They're not going to change it. They're not going to go back and redo it because it's not how it works. Um,
Right.
but I do appreciate that kind of perspective. That is kind of interesting. Uh, one of the things that comes up when I talk about Path of Exile with Diablo people is there's this impression around Path of Exile that you need to be some sort of spreadsheet genius to
Right.
figure it out, which is I'm an English teacher. I make very few spreadsheets in my life, and I can get through it. Um, but my question is towards onboarding. As
Right.
you guys are moving into Path of Exile 2, is there any talk around onboarding newer players? Or we just saw with Diablo 4, it came to Game Pass with Xbox, and suddenly just kind of
Right.
blew up. ARPGs are getting into the hands of more people, and I think when
Yeah.
Path of Exile 2 comes out, it's going to be the exact same thing.
Hmm.
Are there conversations around onboarding for newer players to kind of prevent that stigma that,
Right.
well, I don't think is true, is still out there?
So it absolutely does need to be considered. So I guess that I would say though that there are a couple of aspects to this. So one of them is that part of the reason why the game is so complicated is just because of the amount of content it has, and also the degree of familiarity that existing players have with it. Because as far as an existing player is concerned, if you don't know to do, this particular mechanic, then you don't know how to play the game, and that's because, like, like that gives, oh, this gives you a 20% boost in damage or whatever it is, right? If you're not doing that, you're an idiot. And so therefore, that sort of ends up being the sentiment in the of like you kind of get this cross pollination of like new content has to be balanced for the power level of the players, and there's also this expectation that you have to be able to, like a build isn't viable if you can't kill whatever the most recent thing that you put in there, right? So
How many
therefore
shivers per
anyone
second does it do?
right,
Like
right, sure. So therefore you kind of end up in the situation where the complicated things that you have to do to unlock the highest level of DPS have become effectively mandatory, and then that effectively increases the skill ceiling of the game because you have to that like you have to do all the spreadsheeting stuff. You know what I mean? So like if you were to look at the complexity it would take to get you through to the content that we had earlier on, I don't know that that's necessarily changed all that much. I mean, sure, there's other stuff you could engage with, and that stuff might be useful, but you don't have to, right? Like you can kind of choose not to. So it really comes down to what is the minimum level of complexity you need to be able to do the end game stuff, which is what's considered viable, and that of course is going to be high, just due to all of the optimization that players have done over time. So I think they've kind of got just being a new game, you already have two things going for you. One of them is that you don't have like 10 years of content being added, although a lot of that stuff will come back as like in some form. And people also don't know what the best is, right? So they have to learn that and work it out. And so everyone's kind of on the same footing as you come in at a new game launch. Like we're all just as dumb as each other. Like, sure, maybe there's some stuff that you could know from Path of Exile 1 that will help you because mechanics are similar in certain ways. Like you understand the concept of a support gem. You understand like the concept of how the flask system works and that kind of thing, right? And that stuff like still fundamentally works the same or similar ways. Um, so you've got that going for you, but then like what the best is, like what skills to pick, what combinations to do, not everyone is on the same footing there. And so I think that will immediately mean you just kind of get that reduction in perceived complexity just from that. Um, then on the other hand, we also do need to actually work on improving things. And so we absolutely have focused on making sure that things are better. And to me, that's just about reducing incidental complexity of what things that don't need to be as complicated as they are to achieve the objective that they achieve. Like how can we reduce the complexity of those? And so, for example, and I use this example all the time because it's probably one of the biggest ones that for Path of Exile 2, that was one of the reasons why we needed to change stuff, is the way the gem system works with the way that they socket into items, right? Like having to worry about your items, like your body armor, for example, in order to change the power level of your main skill, um, wasn't great. So it's just one of those things that a newbie can kind of get tripped up over. And what is it really buying us? Like the main thing that the socketing and the way that you do combination, like that can be separate and that's still just as cool without having to be attached to the items. And so that is an example of something where we can just change the way that works. We've not sacrificed anything when we did it. And it's just a straight up more easily understandable system. So there's things like that I think are important to change. So yeah, there's a bunch of stuff that we're doing. I mean, like there's even more than that, especially recently. We've been really focusing on the stuff recently because, the other thing about releasing a new game is it's another opportunity to do the stuff we did in the start of like, oh, let's just watch a new player play for a while. And honestly, we don't really do that with PoE1 development at this point. It's being tested on players who already know the game, not players who don't. And so that stuff, I mean, I'm sure there are just regressions in PoE1 from how the new player experiences that we're not even necessarily even aware of. And that kind of stuff, a chance to kind of do all that stuff again, I think, is also another great thing. So yeah, it'll definitely be easier, I think, for new players to get into. And I think that it's not, but it isn't any real one thing. I think it's a combination of many factors, and that will kind of lead to a situation where I think it can be more mainstream than it is now. Yeah, that's kind of a long-winded answer, but hopefully that kind of gets to the
No, I think
stand.
I mean it's super informative, and I think you are spot on about like it's not just a tutorial that you slap on at the beginning. Like, yeah, we made a tutorial and now it's easy.
Right,
No, you got to kind of get rid of some of that bloat.
right,
Um, and I think it will be exciting. Now, one of the things I've noticed in trying to consume as much PoE2 content as I can is a slower pace. Uh,
right.
it seems much more slow, which personally, big fan. Is the in
The thing I would say about it though, always with this, is that once again, the intention is not to slow it down. And it's even interesting having a look recently because so we've been really looking at support gems again recently, like kind of getting into that. And the question really is like, okay, like what are we going to actually allow as far as like the level of spam and so on? And we tried some, just as a point of interest, like we tried like, okay, what if we did just like limit, like what if we don't have GMP and we've only got LMP, for example, like we just don't let you get up to that sort of crazy level of thing. And like we tried that, and the funny thing about it is that the actual reaction from people when they do that is like, well, this just isn't as cool as PoE1 is. So it's actually kind of important that you do have some of those mechanics that let you get really powerful in those sorts of ways. But what I was always unhappy about with PoE1 is the degree to which you get completely incomprehensible um, visuals to the point where it doesn't even like make sense what you're doing anymore. And I think that what we're trying to thread the needle with here is to feel like you get ultra powerful and insane without getting to the point where it's so unreadable that you don't have to respond to anything anymore, or that you don't have to like care about what what a boss might be doing or what the mods are on a rare and that kind of stuff. Like I think you should still have to care about that stuff um, on some level anyway. And
right? Jonathan, I
That's
mean,
the
I think
part.
I think I think right there, like you just made a bunch of people happy.
Right.
Like that is that's huge because I think even so, Diablo 4 has been out for a year, and we're
Hmm.
seeing that because the speed is just amping up so much, and it is
Hmm.
hard to kind of gauge. And to hear you say like the goal is for that to be more of a purposeful thing, but not loaded,
Right.
not too screen heavy.
Right.
That like I want to play that. I want to
Right.
experience
But we still want to be in a world where GMP can exist, you know? We're
that.
great. That's great. That's greater multiple projectiles. If
Right.
anyone's not a PoE player, where you can, we can add a lot of projectiles to your skills. And yeah, I mean, like the discussion recently really is like, okay, so what is GMP? What can it be? I mean, we had it just because we've had it, like it works and everything. It's kind of always worked, but it's kind of like really zeroing in on like what is the power a support gem can give you? What is acceptable? Is Should it be the case that I mean, one thing that I've always wanted is that you don't just put the same support gems on every skill. That like this is the skill I'm putting GMP on, but this other skill I'm not doing that, and like there have to be reasons for that to work and so on. So we kind of both need to make sure that the power level that like you want it to be that certain support gems increase the power on certain skills more than others, so that you feel smart for when you work out what the right things to do are. But there also needs to be the case that it can't just be that, oh, this is the support gem that goes with the skill, and like this is the only option. If you don't have this, then then you're terrible. Which is back to that whole skill ceiling thing. And there needs to be multiple options for how to make it OP. And the multiple projectiles seems to come up just because it's so like hard to thread that needle of like and it almost defines what the power level of a support gem can be, even just by itself with how it's balanced, since it is such a it can be such a huge damage increase. Um, and we even tried at one point. Okay, like what would it look like if we always had the downside be a more multiplier? So that is to say, a reduction in damage equivalent to the increase in projectiles. And what we found then is it still wasn't fun because you look at it and you're like, well, okay, well, why am I using this? In theory, you're using it just to increase the AOE coverage of a skill that isn't AOE. But in practice, it just doesn't live up to the dream of I put this on and now I've got 3 more projectiles and now I'm doing like maybe not triple damage, but at least a lot more damage. So
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, like
like
that's logical to me. Like if I'm
yeah,
doing
yeah.
three of something, they should be
Yeah.
powerful.
So if you just nerf the damage completely, it just feels lame. But then that was the thing, is this was the initial theory of like, oh yeah, what if support, what if supports didn't even increase your damage really? They just kind of change how the skill functions, but it like so you see, it gives you the variety without actually increasing the damage very much. But then yeah, we just found it wasn't really fulfilling the like the dream you have of put this on and now I'm real powerful, like that you need that. So yeah, this is really our challenge right now, and it may seem late in development to be getting to this point, but honestly, like you need a lot of skills. You need a lot of skills to try it on to really get the feeling for this. And so what
I
we
think that's a
basically had for long. Go on.
Uh, that's a nice little segue here because the goal in this conversation is to try and talk about everything, and skills
Mm-hmm.
was one of them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so let's make that a little highlight. Skills here.
Mm-hmm.
You Path of Exile has a lot of skills,
It does.
and my main question was going to be centering around like how do you balance that? So you're kind of already going into it, but just now we have a nice little segue here.
Um, it's very hard. Um, the funny thing about PoE 1 is that on some level it's not as hard, and that's because in PoE 1 there's much more of an expectation of you have one 6 link, you spam that skill. And so every skill basically has to be balanced at that point to be as good as every other skill. And so on some level, that's actually easy. You just look at what the best thing you can do with that skill is, and then you adjust everything until it reaches the point where that's the case. It is way harder to do this when you're expected to use many different skills and they're supposed to combine with each other. Because, yeah, honestly, I can't even say that we have solved it yet, right? Like, it's hard. Um, and especially with support gems. I guess it remains to be seen as to whether we will be successful. Right now, I will say that Path of Exile 2 isn't yet at the point where it's balanced across classes or skills or anything really. I mean, we're trying, but it is very hard to do. And part of the thing that we run into all the time when trying to do this is that once again, the dream of what something does versus the reality of what it can do when factoring in all the most abusive way to use it. I really don't want the abuse case to define the balance for the fun, for the fun dream of it. Like once again with multiple projectiles, it's like the way you could balance that is by just looking at what skill has the most abusive overlap of damage regions or whatever, and then be like, okay, so this is our North Star for multiple projectiles. We balance it based on that, and then that will be a huge damage penalty. And then every other skill is now effectively useless with multiple projectiles because that one skill existed that took advantage of it in a particularly good way. And that's what I want to avoid. I want to be able to solve that. And um, like we've got our various plans that we're doing, and like we're doing a lot of stuff with that at the moment. But it's yeah, it's tough. And that even comes that question of like the fun dream of how something should be versus the balanced reality of it is really annoying on so many levels, almost everywhere, all the time. Like it's actually it's kind of the worst part of the game designer's job in some ways, and it's almost worse the more experience you have, because you're constantly worrying about all these pitfalls that you know are there that you've had experience with, and even just to take support gems again as another example, it's like it feels like you want to have different power on all sorts of different support gems all the time, or like be able to kind of just make the balance of each one fun individually. But then over time in PoE one, what that's meant is like over time they've all had to just get random kind of balance, like in order to make them actually usable compared to what they compete with, they've all had to get just like random damage bonuses and stuff. And then now when you look at support gems, they've all just got kind of these, they've all kind of like blended into this like one kind of mass of like not really being that interesting anymore, in my opinion. Like they've lost some of what makes them cool. And so then you come to PoE 2 and like, well, let's fix that problem. Let's like not have this thing where you just get random damage bonus and everything. Let's make sure that each skill, each support is like really unique and interesting and kind of does its own thing. We don't have to worry about the other supports. And then you do that for a little while, and then you realize that we've run straight back into the reasons why we had to change the balance in the first place. And so yeah, like you just fall into those balance traps again. And even something as simple as like, okay, what percentage of fire damage does the skill do? Like you'd want to be able to look at it and be like, well, I look at the art and it like kind of looks like it should be about 80%, or it looks like it should be about 50% or whatever. And then you get the thing of like, oh, but that means that the someone who allocates increases in fire damage on their passive tree gets a bigger bonus from this skill than they get from that skill, which means that only the skills that have 80% conversion are the ones that are allowed to be that you actually use, and all the ones that don't have that become useless. And like just such that simple, tiny decision, which should be just something that you can do thematically and just let it fall out in the balance, just kind of becomes something that you can't make decisions like that. And so it's a real pair of handcuffs, honestly, when doing all that stuff. Like, it really is quite painful. But I mean, we just kind of have to be able to do it, right? That we have to work out what we're going to do. And so, yeah, yeah. I guess all of that is to say it's hard. I don't know. All that.
No, I
Um,
don't imagine it. I mean,
mm,
I mean, every league that comes out, there's new skills that are going with it,
mhm,
which then again more balance and like
mhm.
how hard is that when you know that somebody's favorite skill is not gonna make the cut. Like it's not going to be, and it's not to say like tiering of skills, but it's just like, yeah, we know that's
Right.
not where it should be, and we know what's your favorite skill, but we got two more leagues before we're gonna be able to get to that.
You mean in terms of PoE one development, just in terms of
And
modification, or in PoE
yeah, I
two?
guess like yeah, either or, like like
Right,
a
right.
skill's just not
Well, I mean,
quite there.
in PoE two, we're kind of just like, I want to bring back iconic things, but we have to reinterpret them in a PoE two context, and so a lot of things end up just so different from how they were that while it's got the same name, the same theme, or even maybe similar art, the mechanics are so different that it kind of ends up being quite a different play experience. And so at some point they're not even the same skill anymore, like they're just kind of a thematic vestige of what they were. And
That does that sounds like a big advantage for you guys with PoE too.
right,
Uh
for sure, for
and
sure.
and just like everything's going to
Um,
be fresh and new.
right, right. So then, therefore, it kind of is okay. But in PoE one, yeah, I mean, look, there's so much content there that at this point it's more about just like selecting a few things. We'll modify those things, and if that doesn't happen to hit what you're doing, well, you can do something else. There's just enough content there that, like whatever you'll find something interesting to play. Um, the I guess like at this point, if you're just like I play the same skill every league, I mean, yeah, that isn't a fun existence. I would think surely you want to try something different each league.
I,
Um,
I would
but
think, but I've seen some build
yeah,
creators out there.
sure.
They're content. Um, okay. Obviously, we have a limited time here, so let's bounce
Hmm.
around a little bit because you talked
Hmm.
a bit about it with classes. How do you make the jump to 12, Jonathan? 12
Um,
classes.
yes.
12.
So
Plus,
how did
correct me
that
if I'm
how did
wrong,
that
three
happen?
ascendancies apiece as well.
Yep, correct, correct. So the initial issue we were having. Let me think about what it was. Okay, so we were adding some extra weapon types, right? So extra weapon classes. And one of the things we've noticed in PoE 1 is that the stereotype of what you pick when you're on the character selection screen very much defines how where you go with that character, especially when you're new. Like most people aren't going to pick a ranger and then go do melee. It's just kind of not what you really do. So having an idea of what type of character I'm building is super important. But then we had more stereotypes that we wanted to have than what we had could do with six. And so then we're like, okay, well, what can we do about that? We kind of wanted to have, um, uh, things like a druid, right? The whole like transforming stuff. And it's like, well, where does that go? Like, what classic ones? Because it's most aligned mechanically with strength int, but like it doesn't really feel like a Templar should be turning into a bear. It just kind of doesn't really feel right. So then we were like, okay, well, what do we need to do? Well, like, so we basically had to, we knew we wanted to do shapeshifting. Where does it go? We kind of had to, to find a way. So that's really where it came from. And then once again, it's like, well, we couldn't. Sure, you don't expect to pick Templar and turn into a bear. So if we want to give that expectation at the beginning of the game, we kind of have to have something for you to pick. And yeah, that's how we end up with 12. It seems a bit absurd, and like honestly, like in some respects, like it feels like it's a bit. I worry it will be choice paralysis at the start of the game. But it does give you all of the different archetypes that we want to be able to let you do. And technically speaking, the only difference between the say the druid and the Templar is what your character looks like, what skill you get in the what skill and weapon you get given in the starting beach, and what your ascendancy classes are. So what that means is that there's nothing stopping you just being a Templar and turning into a bear. You can pick all the same skills. When you do select your skill rewards from when you do quests, you can still pick Templar skills if you're a druid and vice versa. And in fact, you can pick from any class. There's no restriction at all. But the UI definitely like shows you the stuff for your class first. So like you're very likely to pick that. But yeah, there's no actual restriction. You can do whatever you like. So yeah, ultimately the only real restriction that you're actually locked into is just what your ascendancy classes are.
It's still, I do recall the initial, I think when PoE2 was announced, seeing like shapeshifting on like the Ranger of some sort, like way back in the day. Um,
Um, yeah, I think it
I
might
think
have
there
been
was gonna be like
there.
some shape-shifting skills, and then
Oh yeah, I
again,
think on the ascendancy class we had a shapeshifting skill on the ranger as well in one of the ascendancies at the time, which we might still do. I think it is like I mean I think that the intention there was that like okay sure like in terms of the main skills that you use the druid mostly has them on that kind of strengthened area, but we wanted to have something special somewhere else as well just because we can do it and that was kind of the thinking for that.
it's still absolutely phenomenal that you guys are making this kind of a huge leap here.
Right.
So, I'm going to do some simple math, but 12 classes, three ascendancies apiece, that's 36. Like
Correct.
I always
Correct.
feel like the ascendancy is a class in of itself. 36. Um, and then you choose multiple different skills. again,
Right.
this goes back to my snowflake analogy that every playthrough definitely ends up feeling very
Right.
different due to stuff like this. Um, so we just recently with Diablo, we got the newest season, which is focused on redoing itemization.
Right.
You're tackling itemization, I assume,
Correct.
constantly. Um, How's your kind of going into this, is there the focus on crafting items being the ultimate goal, or is it found items being the best thing that you can end up coming across, or is
So
it this weird mix? Like where are you
it's
falling
definitely
when it comes to that?
it's definitely a mix. But the key thing that we definitely want to avoid is the level of ridiculous spam of useless items that PoE1 has. And so we've changed the drop system pretty fundamentally in several ways in order to prevent that. I actually think that in the last like week, we've got it feeling pretty good. I would say. I think that like we flailed around a little bit with some stuff. There's a lot of things to address. But I'd say that it's feeling pretty damn good now. And I guess the question of what does good feel like? Well, the answer, I guess, it feels like you're getting upgrades. You don't feel like you just like instantly go to rare right at the beginning of the game, and then you never like it's just rares from that point onwards, because like thus eradicating the value of like of whites and blues. You actually pick items up all the time. In fact, in my playthroughs now, I pick up every blue for a long time. You care about them. But there's enough whites there. It feels like items are dropping. The actual amount of items that drop as you just play through the game regularly feels quite similar actually to how PoE1 does. It just doesn't have the like weird crap at the end where things go nutballs and you get sort of strange effects. And yeah, like as I said, I think we're kind of hitting it, and the gold actually has helped a lot. The gold is good. I think it was a mistake when we didn't have gold in PoE1 as much as we thought we knew what we were doing. And yeah, I mean it's good. Um, yeah, I mean I guess as far as like what Diablo was doing, I actually think a lot of what they're doing there is pretty interesting. It strikes me as I mean I haven't actually played the new season, so I can't actually judge how it feels in practice. But just from reading the blog post, I was sort of I thought that I think they were going in the right direction. But I honestly have no idea what the community sentiment about that is at this point. It'd be interesting to
Well,
know even.
I mean, it's still early, right? So it
Right,
launched
right.
on Tuesday. The general
Hmm.
sentiment is that people like it.
Right,
There's
right,
still
right.
issues. Like there's
Yeah,
the end game still needs a little bit more
right,
polish and what have you, but people are
right,
enjoying being able to craft items,
right,
um, play with builds, and it's opened up build diversity a lot. Whereas,
right,
Path of Exile, as you're talking about support gems, feels like the tempering is an option to do that. Like, hey, let's
right,
port skills through crafting in this manner,
right, right.
um, which wasn't really possible prior. So, yeah, it's been a little different. And I think that actually was one of those Twitter questions. Was obviously years ago when you guys are building Path of Exile 1,
Hmm.
there were other ARPGs on the market,
Hmm.
but not at this level, right? We're seeing
Hmm.
more and more come out. So I'm not going to say what are you stealing, right? Because, but what's, I guess, what's been inspiration from other ARPGs that you have liked, or even if you're not going to implement them, you're like, oh, I appreciate what they have done with that.
It's really hard to point to any one thing, honestly, because it's all just the zeitgeist of like what is the player expectation of quality that you need to be able to deliver to kind of be taken seriously. And to me, that's the more important thing. I don't know that I necessarily look at things and be like, yeah, I'm going to take this. Um, there's no like, I don't think there's anything else. This sounds very arrogant, but like, I don't really like most of the other action RPGs that come out for various reasons. And so I mean that while they all have various different good qualities, like I still like what we're doing better. That said, even PoE1 I have trouble with now, just because like what PoE2 feels like is just a very different experience, and so Like it's I'm definitely a lot happier with what we've got going on here. Um, like the, I think like there's definitely quality of life things that I think that people do like around the UIs and things that I think we can absolutely learn from stuff like that. I think that PoE one's UI has been historically fairly weak from an experience point of view in some cases. There's like a lot of things that we can improve. So like that's sort of important, I think, and I think those things as well as like um, there's really no reason not to give people more information most of the time. And so that's the sort of stuff that we can do that really just improves things for no real downside, and like we can just do better there. Um, so I mean that's something that's very easy to look at other games and be like, yeah, they're just doing the stuff straight up better. But in terms of the actual gameplay, I don't know that I would say that there's anything really that I'm like, yeah, okay, this was a really good decision. Um, they all kind of all these things, different things have their quirks, and I think we've got a much more traditional take on a lot of the stuff than what a lot of modern games have. But yeah, I don't know. Like I guess that's a bit of a non-answer, really. But
Well, I do I like how you said, well, it sounds arrogant, but I mean, like you're making the game, and like it is in some ways like this is what you guys started out to do of like, hey, no one's
right,
doing this, let's make this. So finding some confidence in what you're doing is absolutely a good thing.
right,
Uh, and I think, for anybody listening, as they are hanging on your every word, right? Um, like that's got to feel good, like that you feel confident or confident enough in what you are doing to say so. So I feel good about PoE too. Um, so I'm going to get yelled at if I don't ask this. And
hmm
we're pre-recording, so if you don't want to answer, that's totally fine. We'll cut it. Um, there was a beta scheduled for
yes,
soon.
hmm
You don't have to tell me a date because this is not the spot for that, right?
hmm
Well, could people expect to hear something at some point soon?
Yeah, so we will at some point, I mean, announce when the beta will start. What I will say is that even though we delayed the beta, we're still going to be doing testing like a lot. It's not like the game, like it's not like we suddenly got close to here and we like suddenly realized, oh, like we didn't finish half of it. You know what I mean? Like we still have a lot of game here, and we still plan on doing some testing. It's just that the scale of it's going to be a lot smaller and much more internal, like than what we were planning before. So we'll be testing a smaller portion as well. So pretty soon we're going to be doing some more stuff like for a much smaller group, fully NDA'd, like ideally you won't ever hear about that it even existed. So that kind of stuff. So we'll be doing a lot of that kind of stuff real soon. But the in terms of the beta, yeah, later on in the year. And we'll announce that a bit later on. But yeah, like
Again, this podcast, not the
yeah,
place for dates.
right, right. I mean,
Why are
I
people
honestly,
why are people asking me to ask that?
yeah,
Like,
the decision to delay was like so painful, um, really painful, um, because I had my heart set on getting. I mean, honestly, I wanted to get the game out last year, and even delaying it to the middle of this year, as far as the beta concerned, was still really painful because I really wanted to go head to head with D4. Seems like dumb, but I actually really did because we went head to head with D3 back in the day, and I don't know, like I just thought it would be, I just wanted to do it. I just thought it'd be cool. So that felt sad, that they beat us out by quite a long margin. But oh well, it doesn't really matter in the end. Look, at the end of the day, right? Like when the game comes out, like in 10 years from now, whether it was this year or the last, or last year, it won't matter. But still, it felt real bad to miss that one.
yeah, I totally get that.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, when you guys do release,
Mm-hmm.
I think it'd be nice to just give you guys the spotlight. Not even fight for it. Just like you've earned it. You guys have spent so much time with PoE one. Like let's just give you all the attention that you guys definitely do deserve. Um, so soonish is what you're saying, and I'm going to go back
Mm-hmm.
to what you said before. You're looking for people, who aren't that good at the game to play it. You want to look at fresh. you want fresh eyes playing
I mean,
the game.
we also need experienced players as well. Don't get me wrong, but we
No,
need
no,
to
you don't.
test things out.
It's just this guy.
Right.
And I will happily sign up. You send the NDA over. I will sign it quickly and discreetly, of course. Uh, of course. Okay, so we're gonna run out of time soon. I want to go to all of the Twitter questions that
Hmm.
weren't people sending vaginas. Twitter is sometimes a cesspool. Uh, okay. Nope, that's a question you can't answer. Uh, okay. So, weapon swapping. If people want to swap between dual wielding and a shield, will they be able to have their main hand weapon stay on the same between both sets?
That actually is something that's not implemented, but we have talked about implementing that. So it may happen. I don't see a reason why not. Yeah, we've talked about having it so that you can lock a one of the hands so that it's the same on both weapon sets. And that way you could like reuse your shield between two different weapon types, for example. And that was primarily the motivation for that. Was actually the primary motivation initially was for minion characters because they need to use spirit, and so if they have a scepter to maintain the minions, it would suck if just to use a different wand in your main hand that you had to get another scepter with the same spirit rolls to be able to support your minions. So we were like, okay, we kind of have to support like locking one weapon in the sets to both sets so that you can yeah, change out one without the other. And yeah, that will also enable what you were just talking about there.
Wait, so for you, Max, Max Chow, that's your answer. Okay. From there, what else we got? I saw one that was actually pretty good. Real simple. Are there going to be halberds as two-handed spears?
No, there aren't. We've I believe not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Real simple for you,
Hmm.
Northerner 7. Go through. Mm, yeah, so here's that question I was talking about before. Could you just grab Path of Exile 2 and go back to PoE 1.4? Could you do that?
I think that would be not particularly productive. You know, it's funny because you look at like WoW Classic or something like that, and it's kind of interesting because they kind of went that way in a way, while keeping the original game up, and it's kind of it's something that's sort of vaguely interesting to me. But yeah, I think in practice, people would have a hard time going back
So
to some.
it's obviously we have a little while till April Fools, but maybe log away PoE Classic, um, and just to see what happens because it seems like um, it
I'm
would
sure there
be
are certain people who would like
liked.
that.
Okay, another one. Could you stop with the podcast and just show gameplay? I feel like that's more towards me, but
I mean, you know, we did have that event pretty recently where we just let people record gameplay. So, you know, if you're looking for that, then you know you can do that.
but
But the nice thing about the
but
podcast is
more.
that, yeah, the nice thing about the podcast is it's very easy to not have to prepare for them, right? You just come on, talk about random stuff, you know. Whereas making a gameplay video, you know, there's some work there.
Yeah,
So
right. And you got
yeah,
to worry about what you can and can't show.
for
Um,
sure.
so you've been very generous with your time, Jonathan. I do very much appreciate it. We typically close every episode with an homage to the cow level, right? Uh, we'll say, our typical thing, close it out as we always do with a moo moo moo. I'll ask you to moo, and you can if you want. But if we're going to talk about secrets, um, we're not going to divulge everything, but for those who have found some secrets in Path of Exile 1, will PoE 2 deliver as well?
I'm hoping that you will enjoy some of the stuff. Like, it's fun to put that stuff in. So therefore, it tends to happen. So yeah, hopefully you'll find some interesting little tidbits in there. But as for an entire secret level with unique monsters, not sure about that. But we'll see. Well, hopefully you'll enjoy a few of the little Easter eggs in there.
Well, there you have it. Fishing is confirmed. All right, let's close it out as we always do with a moo, moo, moo.
All right. I'm supposed to be mooing now.
If you want,
Go.
sure.
All right. All right. Moo. There you go. That'll have to
That was
do.
great.